Welcome to the only podcast focusing specifically on the largest flood control project being built in the United States right now. Hosted by former news anchor and Fargo resident Darren Selvig. This is the Diversion Download.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the brand new Diversion Download podcast. And this is going to be an opportunity to talk with all of you in some depth about what is an amazing project that is being worked on in the Fargo-Moorhead area and the surrounding area, the FM Area Diversion Project. My name is Darren Selvig, and you're going to be able to see this podcast on all sorts of places. You'll be able to see it on Facebook, YouTube. If you go to fmdiversion.gov, you'll see all sorts of links there. You can watch out for Twitter updates. So it's all very plugged in and a very open kind of a conversation. And today, to kick things off for the Diversion Download podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joel Paulsen, who is the Executive Director of the Diversion Authority. Joel, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Darren. Thank you.
Excellent. Now you have, we can kind of take in this first episode kind of a broad overview of where things stand with the diversion project and zoom in on some things as well. And this project is in excellent hands because you have quite a bit of engineering experience and experience living right here in the Fargo-Moorhead area.
Yeah, that's right, Darren. So I grew up in Moorhead, Moorhead High School grad, Go Spuds. I went to NDSU, I got my bachelor in science in civil engineering and began in the consulting world locally. Worked on hundreds of projects across North Dakota and Minnesota. Many flood control projects, and I ran for city council in 2016 as an effort to just kind of give back to my community. My experience of working with local government really fascinated me, and I saw a lot of different opportunities to be able to step in and help out with problem-solving skills that engineers just inherently have in dealing with social issues. When I was on the city council, I was appointed to the diversion board and started to really get involved in this project. And what I found is that this is really the only project that can provide permanent flood protection for the community. And we needed to move forward and figure out a way to implement it. And so as time went on, the diversion board decided to hire an executive director, and fortunately I was able to get into this role and be able to help in a different aspect. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I can't wait to go into some detail on all those things that you brought up. And I think that people are going to find this very interesting to learn about your professional background. And also, maybe we could start by talking about your personal background. You are invested in this area, which is a very personal thing. And I can only imagine that it just drives you even more to oversee what is a fantastic project. Tell us a little bit about your family background.
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. So I grew up in Moorhead, as I mentioned before. I have many friends and family members in this community. In fact, I can trace my roots all the way back to the founding of Moorhead. So wow. Definitely have a lot of vested interest in this community. I can't think of a better place to raise my kids and my family than the Fargo-Moorhead area. We have great schools, we have great amenities. It's just a fabulous area, and I can't ever think of moving out of here, and so I want to make sure that as I go through my professional career that I'm giving back to this community for everything that it's giving me and my family. I've had, over the years, I've had uncles and aunts lose their home due to flooding.
Wow.
I can remember back to even the 1986 flood, I believe. I was very young at that time, but I remember my uncle losing his home during that flood event and everything that he went through in order to reestablish and try to collect what he could from the destruction of that event. Obviously, 97 occurred. At that time, I was old enough to start to be able to volunteer and fill sandbags and throw sandbags and make levees. Fast forward to 2009, and at that time I was a contract employee for the city of Fargo as a consultant, managing a portion of the levee system. We were within inches of losing the levee system that I was monitoring. In fact, we almost had a breach that we were fortunate enough to fill, and it was really impactful event for me because what I realized is the homes were occupied behind that temporary levee system.
Yeah. And
had it breached, we would have lost homes, and people would have been in those homes, and there would have been a significant chance that somebody would have been hurt or killed during an event such as that.
Right.
And so it really, it probably strengthened my resolve to try to figure out solutions to be able to implement that would provide permanent flood protection so that we would never have to rely on temporary measures such as what we did in 2009. And really, Darren, I think you can recall how impactful that event was for the community. I mean, everything was shut down. You couldn't travel. There were only 2 bridges that were open between Moorhead and Fargo. Had those closed, you couldn't access emergency hospitalization. Moorhead would have been cut off. I believe we had initiated some level of evacuation. And it's easy to forget those things as time goes on and we recover and things get back to normal. And so the diversion project itself has always been going on in the background, and we're getting some really significant traction and starting to implement the project, and so it's pretty amazing to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and see what permanent flood protection is going to provide us. So.
You're right in the impact, especially in 2009. I was working in the area, but a lot of people, including the rest of my family, had evacuated. I was living in South Fargo, and one of my neighbors was volunteering walking the dikes just to make sure that there weren't breaches, like similar to what you were doing in an official capacity. And he said, I believe that we got really close. And he saw the issues. There was a potential breach or a close breach there. So you're right. So many people were affected. And I think that was the moment when a lot of people realized in the general public, something really does need to be done.
Absolutely. I went home the night after we almost had the breach in 2009, after having worked straight for 42 hours without any sleep. And it was the night that the river crested, and the projections were for the river to go to 45 feet. And I knew that the levees were only built to 43, 44 at the best in some cases. And so I was convinced going home that night we were going to lose the community. Went home after working 42 hours straight, started moving things out of our basement, gathering our belongings, in anticipation for that loss. And with 4 little kids at the time, and my wife not really knowing what was going on, and we didn't have any place planned to go to, it's just an experience that I hope that nobody would ever have to go through again.
That's right. I was working in a media newsroom at the time, and you could feel the collective size of just sort of dread almost every day as the new predictions would come out on a daily basis. And we got to a point when we realized, as you said, this was above where we thought it would ever go. I mean, just in the general public and eventually beyond where the levees were built. So it really is amazing, an amazing thing that we're talking about a project that is underway now that is going to take care of all of that. Right. And we were talking a little bit before we started the podcast here, and you shared with me a real passion that you have for tackling a problem, coming up with a solution, and executing that solution. And you've got a great team working with you on that. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? That's
right, Darren. So one of my passions professionally is problem solving. Engineers just inherently do that on a day-to-day basis, trying to figure out solutions to problems. And those problems could be social problems, it could be infrastructure problems, and that apex of where those kind of collide is where engineers kind of find their area of expertise. One of the things I really enjoy about my position is coming to work every day and working with folks that are at the top of their game and coming up with consensus-built problem-solving solutions. And a lot of the issues we deal with on the diversion project is related to solutions that are complex. There's no easy answer to some of these things, whether it be property relocation, whether it be implementation of infrastructure related to environmental impacts. All of these things are complex problems that require a team approach. And I've been very fortunate to be able to work with such great people on our team to be able to figure out and problem solve and find solutions. We have a lot of problems still that we are working on, a lot of long-term issues, but I'm confident that with the right people and the right conversations that we can find consensus-based solutions to our issues.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about all that, and we'll talk about the issues and problems and solutions that have been come up with already. But let's just start with talking about where the project is now. How can you update us on that?
So the project's moving forward in many different avenues. Right now we're building the inlet structure, and that's currently about 20% complete. We have started construction on the wild rice control structure, which is a $50 million gated structure located next to the Wild Rice River. We're significantly far along with our Red River control structure plans and specifications, about 65%. We do intend to bid that project in the next 2 years. That is a critical path project, so everything kind of hinges around when the completion of the Red River control structure is done, and that kind of will dictate when we finally have our permanent flood protection. We've implemented 22 miles of levees and pump stations within the city of Fargo. City of Moorhead is almost complete. There's a few gaps in the levee system that the city of Moorhead is working on. And so things are moving along very well. As far as the actual diversion channel construction is concerned, we hope to start moving dirt on that the fall of next year. So that's getting pretty close, and it's getting pretty exciting that we're getting that far along in the process.
Well, especially after spending years and years of research, design, all those things, to finally see it to physically start to come together it has to be very rewarding for you too.
Absolutely. We have a lot of work ahead of us, obviously. But to get to the point that we are now, given all the hurdles that have been in place, is really quite amazing.
Now, people may not be familiar with this term, but P3 is something that's discussed a lot with the diversion project, and it has to do with how private industry is involved in this. And as I understand it, this is the first P3 project that the Corps has undertaken. Is that right?
That's correct, Darren. So this is an innovative approach to contracting. It really taps into the private market as well as private equity that comes to the table to supplement the taxpayer dollars that are going into building the diversion project. The Corps now has a few additional P3 projects that they are moving forward with, but none of them are as far along in the process as the FM diversion project. And in fact, the FM diversion project is the case study for the Corps. And so they're learning a lot of things about a split delivery project such as ours, where the Corps is building a component, the dam and the control structures, and a private development company is building the channel component of the project under the direction of the Diversion Authority. And so it's very innovative. It's a very cost savings method of construction. And had we built this under the traditional design, bid, build type of a scenario, the schedule could have been 3 times what we're looking at as far as implementation, and the cost could have been double what we're looking at as far as implementation. So significant advantages to the community and to the taxpayers. And really, I think our principal focus is just getting this thing done in a timely enough fashion that it's ready and prepared for an event such as 2009 or something greater than that, so that we can relax our temporary flood fighting measures and really focus on permanent flood fighting measures.
Absolutely, because the emergency measures that have been undergone every year, we've had serious issues. We're lucky that they were effective. I mean, we had really competent people working on it, but I suppose you never really want to test that too much.
We don't, and when you think about even this year with COVID and everything, all the different social distancing requirements and everything that we have in place, we would not be able to have filled 7 million sandbags if we were to have had a pandemic at the time of the 2009 flood. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we made a lot of headway in implementing in-town permanent flood protection measures. And so the number of sandbags has been drastically reduced that we would have to produce. But even this spring, we still thought the flood was going to be higher than it was, and Sandbag Central was implemented, and we started filling sandbags with volunteers. And that's just not a long-term solution to flood protection for our community. So.
You mentioned COVID. How has that affected what you do every day to make this a reality?
So COVID has had its impacts on the diversion project. We did see a drop in sales tax revenue, which we rely on for our operations and the implementation of the project. However, that's bounced back quite significantly. We're actually above where we thought we were going to be prior to COVID at this point with our sales tax. So I think that shows the resiliency of the Fargo-Moorhead economy and the community. As far as meeting in person with project teams and impacted political jurisdictions, that's been a little bit more difficult.
Sure.
So that's slowed down our schedule slightly, but we've been able to adapt, and we continue to move forward with minimal interruptions.
Mm-hmm. Good. You also talked about property rights, and of course that is always necessary when you're talking about a project of this scope. But can you bring us up to speed on that? How has that been going for the project?
Absolutely, Darren. So that's maybe a little bit more difficult part of my job, as
Sure.
you can imagine. We're dealing with folks that are being required to move for a public infrastructure project that's intended for the greater good. And so we're asking people to give up their homes and their farms and their property that they're currently maybe farming or have future plans for. And so we always have to be cognizant of that. We've implemented a number of different programs to enable us to assist in relocating folks to different areas and being able to purchase their property. As of today, we've purchased 370 parcels. Only a couple of those have required court action, so I think we've been very successful in negotiating a resolution with the property owners in order to acquire those properties. We still have a ways to go, though. We have about another 80 parcels to purchase in order to build the infrastructure for the diversion project. And so a lot of those parcels, some of those may go to court action just because we haven't been able to find a negotiable solution to those. But we continue to try to work with those landowners in many different aspects to find an agreeable solution. But it's really hard, Darren. I mean, it's probably the toughest part about this project is dealing with those impacts.
Sure. I can imagine that would be quite a hardship that some of those folks are going through as a result of this.
Absolutely.
But as you say, those talks continue.
They do.
Back to COVID for a little bit. The infrastructure that has been set up to talk about this publicly was really already established before COVID, and I see what you're doing now is kind of taking that to the next level with putting the meetings online and having them on places like social media and fmdiversion.gov. And so that has to feel good to be to know that is out there and that is accessible to people if they have questions about all sorts of things.
That's right, Darren. So we've really transitioned into more of a virtual environment. I mean, we really value the face-to-face discussions that we have with different social groups and individuals about the diversion project. But you're right, that has been impeded by the COVID social distancing and only being able to have so many people in a room. And so we'd like to continue to explore opportunities like this podcast to be able to get information out to people and make it readily accessible so that people can ask questions. I think there's a lot of questions out there that need to be answered, and we need to be able to provide those formats to disseminate the information and have those discussions. So.
Well, as we start wrapping up this particular discussion, let's look ahead. What's ahead now for the project coming up in the next few months?
So the biggest item on our agenda is the P3 procurement and getting that developer on board in anticipation of moving dirt on the channel by next year. And so we are working with 3 development teams right now who all intend to submit a final bid sometime early next spring. And so keeping that process online and on schedule is probably our top priority right now. Okay. The property acquisition, of course, is tied to that schedule. So you have to imagine all 3 of these teams, they're putting in significant effort to prepare a bid and prepare a design and start to look to giving us a bid to implement the project. And so our schedule for land acquisition is tied to that. And so those are our kind of our big things right now. We also have some litigation ongoing that we hope to resolve by the end of this year and early next year in order to kind of pave the way for the beginning of construction on the channel. The Corps of Engineers is also moving forward with a number of additional projects that they hope to bid and start construction next year. We'll have the I-29 grade raise project and the Southern Embankment Reach 1, which will be the first actual dam portion of the project. Okay. That'll be tied into the inlet structure. So.
And there's a contested case hearing in Minnesota right now that has to do with finalizing the conditions of the DNR permit.
That's correct.
So I suppose there are some things that are being worked out there too.
There is. We hope to get resolution to that and get those permit conditions set in stone. We did receive a DNR permit in December of 2018 that had permit conditions, and we implemented those into our project, and we could meet all of those permit conditions. It was contested by a few local governments on the Minnesota side. So it's a process to go through to maybe at the end of the day refine some of those permit conditions and perhaps they'll be better than the first ones as far as the mitigation that we provide to the residents in Minnesota that are impacted. So. Yeah,
that's a good point, isn't it? The more discussion that you can have about a lot of these things, the closer you get to real effective solutions.
Absolutely.
So that's great. That's great. As we wrap up then, Joel, what is, if you could pick one thing that you'd really like people to know about this project, and we've covered a lot of ground already, but what would that be, do you think?
Darren, I think it would be innovation. So with the P3 agreement and the P3 procurement, there's a lot of innovation that goes into this. And that innovation can be replicated on other projects across the nation and around the world as well. So we're really looking at cutting edge implementation of technology and adaptive management monitoring, both the environment and flood impacts. Related to using technology. And that can be brought to other projects in the future. I think the significant savings we're going to see with the P3 agreement, it can be replicated over and over again to save taxpayer money across the country for other Corps of Engineers projects. And so that's really exciting as well. And at the end of the day, of course, our main focus is providing that permanent flood protection. But I believe we're doing it in a manner that we're looking at it from all different lenses and how we can provide additional public benefit to the implementation of this project.
All right. Terrific. Well, Joel, thank you so much for taking some time out to talk with us and the public with this new podcast. And we really appreciate that. And I'm sure this won't be the last time that we visit. So
no, I hope we can do it again, Darren, and I've really appreciated it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And we're going to have in this podcast in the future more subject matter experts involved with the diversion project, people who are working with Joel, just a whole host of people that we'll be bringing in on an occasional basis. We're not going to have like a solid regular distribution schedule, but we'll put things out when we can or when there are relevant messages to share with folks. So watch this space. We're going to have a lot more for you here on the Diversion Download podcast on Facebook, on fmdiversion.gov, YouTube, Twitter, all sorts of places. So once again, Joel, thank you very much.
Thanks,
everybody.
The Diversion Download is produced and distributed by the Metro Flood Diversion Board of Authority. For more information about the project or to see the latest developments, visit www.fmdiversion.gov. If you have suggestions for this podcast or questions that you would like to hear discussed, contact us on Twitter at FM Diversion or on Facebook or via email. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.